the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Mem Gimel. We started learning on Yoma Daf Mem Beis, the second statement from Rabbi Yitzchak. Quickly reviewing that Omar Rabbi Yitzchak, Shtei Shchitoi Shamati, that he says that I heard a distinction between two different shchitas, two different slaughterings. One, who needs to shech the par aduma, the other, who has to shech the par of Yom Kippur. One of them, says Rabbi Yitzchak, is okay even if it's done by a non-kohen, and the other is invalidated. Rabbi Yitzchak, like the first statement he had on Daf Mem Aleph, does not remember or never knew, doesn't know which one is kosher b'zal, which one is pasul b'zal, and the Gemara began by quoting the machlekes between Rav and Shmuel, and we learned that other Amoraim also opined in this machlekes. Let's focus now on the para aduma. Rav is the one that holds that the para aduma is the one that needs to be done by a kohen, which automatically means that Rav holds that the par of Yom Kippur could be done by a zor, and Shmuel is the one that holds that the para aduma is allowed to be done by a zor. Shmuel is the one that holds that the par of Yom Kippur has to be done by the Kohen Gadol. Now our sugya today, we're going to learn almost an entire daf from Taharis. Yes, there is no Talmud Bavli on Taharis, but we'll have Yoma Mem Gimel will be an entire daf. And we began on daf Mem Beis Amid Beis, when Ula is pointing us to the psukim that we have in the portion of Chukas, that's Bamidbar Yutes. And we will begin quickly going over Psukim Dalid and many Psukim afterwards. There's one underlying Nakuda, that it's not that the Torah begins speaking about Elazar or the Kohen. Almost every verse repeats that it has to be done by Elazar or that it's done by the Kohen. And the obvious question is, if every single step of the Avodah needs to be done by Elazar the Kohen, let the parsha begin that this is done by Elazar, and then just continue speaking about all of the steps of the preparation of the paraduma. The fact that, as we'll see, some psukim mention Elazar, some psukim mention Elazar HaKohen, some psukim b'chlal don't mention anything, is Araya, says Ula, and these are his gavaldik words, that kol ha-parsha kulam, mashma moitzi miyad mashma, there are times that a later step that doesn't say the word Elazar or Kohen, or a later step that has Elazar and Kohen and the previous one does not. So there are times that a rule will change the implied rule from a previous pasuk. The new inference will change the prior inference. And there are times, says Ula, there will not be a consistency, that even if there is a repetition of the word HaKohen, or there is invited again no word Kohen, sometimes we will say that the prior inference will stand, which that's called umashma memela. Now, in the context of the machlekes of Rav and Shmuel, as we already mentioned, I think it's kedai to start again from the second line from the top of the Amid, and we'll see what that means. But again, I'm going to read a few psukim, and we're going to go through almost all the psukim of the parsha. We will see in various instances how one shita, whether it is Rav and Shmuel, we're going to have a machlekes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim regarding other details in the preparation of the mechatos, like who is qualified to gather the ashes and to mix them into the water, who is qualified to sprinkle the waters of the mechatos on those who are tamei b'tumas meis on the third and the seventh day. We're going to find the machlekes whether a woman is qualified halachically to do it, whether a minor is qualified halachically to do it, and various opinions, arguments of Tanoim, and all of this will be predicated in how they applied this concept of mashma, moitzimiyad mashma, versus the other option, which will be mashma mamela, and no, there won't be consistency. Sometimes there'll be a change of rules, and sometimes there will not. And on Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis, we're going to continue with the Mishnah, that continues with the Seder of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur. The Mishnah that we're up to, the step that we're up to, is that after the second vidui on the par of the Kohen Gadol, the shechita has to happen. And that's exactly the machlokes now, whether the shechita has to happen through the Kohen Gadol, or whether the shechita is ksheira bezar. And then we're going to learn the long Mishnah. In the bottom of the Mishnah, we're going to have a moededik machlokes tanoim, a three-way machlokes tanoim regarding how many pyres were there always on the Mizbeach. Yes, when we learned Abaya Hava Mesader, we only spoke about the Marocha Gedoyla and the Marocha Shniya. But as we will see in the Sugya, guys, either there was only two, or there were three, or there were four, and no matter what Shita you subscribe to, on Yom Kippur there was another one, and much more. So even though we left off 4 lines from the top, again I'm going to quickly pull out my Chumash and write Pasuk Gimel, again Chukas, Yutes, Bamidbar Yutes Pasuk Gimel. The Torah speaks about how we should gather the red heifer with all of the qualifications and limitations regarding the red heifer. Unesatem oisa ela Elazar hakoyin. So here we clearly say that it should be given to Elazar hakoyin. Now it's important to remember that Elazar hakoyin then was the skan koyin gadol, and v'hoitzi oisa. The word oisa is extra. El michutz lamachne. V'shachad oisa weiter extra lefanov. I just want to read one more verse. Pasuk Dalet. And here, the Torah repeats Elazar HaKohen. And that's a problem, because we already mentioned Elazar HaKohen. But the pasuk continues in Dalet. V'lokech Elazar HaKohen midama be'etzboi. He takes from the blood on his finger. And Vihiza, by Vihiza, it doesn't say Elazar HaKohen. Vihiza el noichach pnei oil moyed midama shava pa'amim. Okay, so just to have this, let's begin second line from the top of the Amid. When it says Lefanov, V'shachat ois Lefanov, guys, Rav is the shita that holds that the para adam is psula bizarre. The word lefanov doesn't change anything. The pasuk began with Elazar. The shachat oisa must mean Elazar. And the lefanov is, as we learned in the previous year, it means shelo yasiach data mimenu. The special din that you have to have specific kavana, mindfulness, making sure that no source of tumah invalidates not the kohen nor the para aduma. Now Shmuel, hold on, Taka, you think about it. Shmuel is the one that says that the para aduma is ksheira bezar. How can Shmuel say that? Doesn't the pasuk begin with the words v'nasatem oisa el Elazar hakoyin v'hoitzi oisa el mechutz lamachne v'shachad oisa lefanov? Oh, so that will be the first case where Shmuel will say that the word that lefanov, the extra word lefanov, that's the mashma moitzi miyad mashma. In other words, it begins by bringing it in front of Elazar HaKohen. Very nice. But the word lefanov, which is extra, is teaching you that taka the kohen doesn't have to shecht. It has to be slaughtered in front of the kohen. Sheyehei zor shoichet. Elazar has to be present, because at the end of the day, it says v'satem oisa el Elazar HaKohen. But that will be one example where normally we don't see that often. Normally the pasuk begins with the words of v'satem oisa el Elazar HaKohen. And v'shachad oisa, I know that the Torah doesn't use the word Elazar by the shechita, it's mashma, but it's taka mashma because it's a hemshech from the beginning. But we have this concept that the subsequent word lefanov can be moitze miyad, moitze mashma, moitze miyad mashma. And that will be the first case where Rav will disagree with that. Rav will hold, no, mashma memela. Like, how can you say lefanov means anything that will imply that the kohen doesn't have to do the shechita when the pasuk says v'shachat oisa? Who's v'shachat? L'chayra mashma that Elazar HaKohen u'nesatem oisa Elazar HaKohen. Let's continue. Now the Gemara, 4 lines from the top, is focusing on pasuk Dalet. We already read out pasuk Dalet. The question is, why did Hashem have to repeat Elazar HaKohen when pasuk Gimel already spoke about unesatem oisa el Elazar HaKohen? Pashit. Now we already chap now. Since Shmuel learned pshat that the lefanov at the end of pasuk Gimel is mashma moitzi miyad mashma fakert. Lefanov means that the shechita doesn't have to be done by a kohen. So by Shmuel, again you're going to have a mashma moitzi miyad mashma. It's from now on, it changes. You do need a kohen. L'shmuel adore le'elazar. L'Rav. Rav understood Gimel, or Gimel is mashma memela. So continue. Why do you have to v'lakach midama? V'lakach midama. Why do you say Allah Kohen? Havamiyut achar miyut. Indeed, you're writing something, you're limiting something which is unnecessary. So this concept of a double negative is a positive. Ubalashon Chazal miyut achar miyut. Ve'ein mirachar miyut elo l'rabois. What's the l'rabois? That afilu kohen hedyet. Afilu kohen hedyet means even though the shechita had to be done by Elazar Kohen, we're speaking about the first part of Aduma. The Torah repeated the hazah, right? That he has to dip his fingers in the blood and sprinkle it. The hazah of the first part of Aduma can be done by a kohen hedyet. And what is that called? That's called mashma moitzi miyad mashma. Now we're going to skip over pasuk hey. Right? In Pasuk K, you don't have a mention of a kohen, but in Pasuk Vav, if you have a chumash, the Torah weiter. Now, interestingly, in Pasuk Vav, it doesn't say Elazar, but it says HaKohen. It says HaKohen. So, v'lokach HaKohen eitz erez ve'ezov ushni toilas. And in this step, as we learned also in the last year, they would throw these three items inside the burning paraduma. V'lokach HaKohen eitz erez ve'ezov. So the question is, why does the Torah write HaKohen? Lishmuel da'afilu b'kohen hedyet. Don't forget that since, as we just mentioned, that the pasuk dalids v'lakach Elazar HaKohen be'etz damai, according to Shmuel, was a mashma moitzim miyad mashma shchita k'sheira b'zor, the dipping the finger in the blood only with Elazar HaKohen. Throwing now doesn't have to be only by Elazar HaKohen. So this is mashma moitzim miyad. This step can be done by any kohen. Problem is, according to Rav. According to Rav, even the dipping the finger in the blood could have been done by any kohen because of the ein miyut achar miyut elo l'rabbis. So l'Rav Yitzrach, because sal kadai techamin, one might have thought that even the lav gufa the paraninu, since throwing three items in the para is not an avoida in the para. Even the dipping the finger in the blood is considered the avoida begufa the para. This is you're taking foreign items and you're throwing it in. So you might have thought that loy niboya koyin. So kamash malon. That what? Listen, chevre. That mashma memelom. That's the kamash malon. Gewaldik. Now let's go to pasuk zayin. Again in pasuk zayin, where it says that whoever is involved in these steps become tamei, and therefore v'chibes begodav hakoyen. Again, why hakoyen? V'rachatz b'sar b'mayim. So the word koyen is not needed. L'kula alma, up until now, that means once we finish pasuk vav, however we got here, bein l'shmuel, or bein l'rav, bein l'shmuel, that the step in pasuk vav has to be done by a kohen, and it can be a kohen hedyet. So why write HaKohen? So answers the Gemara, that's to tell you a new din. That what? Bechihunoi. That the avoida that needs to be done by the kohen has to be done dafka when the kohen is wearing his big day kahuna. In other words, there is a concept b'chlal in the Beis Hamikdash that if a kohen does the avoida, a kohen, his yichus is of a kohen. His father is a kohen. If he's not wearing the big day kahuna, he doesn't then have a status of a full-fledged kohen. He's called a zor. However, one might have thought that being that the paraduma is done outside Yerushalayim, take, even though the Torah is insisting a kohen, lavdafka, we would think it has to be done by a kohen wearing the garments. So that's the kihunoi, that everything we are learning is dafka kohen while he's wearing his big day kahuna. Now, the next question will be, why does it say in the same pasuk zayin towards the end, v'tamei hakoyen ad ho'erev? Again extra, right? V'tamei ad ho'erev. So he writes that ad ho'erev hakoyen koyen b'kiyunei l'doiros. The extra koyen is lest you think that only the first time you needed to have a kohen wearing his big day kahuna, but maybe in future generations, even though it needs to be done by a kohen, it doesn't have to be bichihunai. So the additional hakohen and pasuk zayin is to tell you that this din, that the kohen doing these steps in the preparation of the paraduma has to be wearing his big day kahuna is also lodoiris. Now hold on. We learned to say the last year. to tell you that it still has to be done wearing big day kahuna. Elalamando Amar, that lodoirois, remember that? You have to have dafka kohen gadol, So if in later generations you see that the Torah is more medayik, is more stringent, is more limiting, so avada, I would know automatically that the din of bichihunoi by the first one will go lodoirois. Hash the kohen gadol beinan. So bichihunoi mibayem. It's a kal v'chomer. To which the Gemara says, you're right. Had the Torah not mentioned in Pasuk Zayin the second time, according to this man, the Amar, I would have known it logically. Nevertheless, there's a rule that Milsa, the Asya, Bekal V'chomer, nevertheless, sometimes, Tanach, so to say, and V'kasav, Law, Kro. Okay? Now in Pasuk Ches, there is no mention of a Kohen, but we're going now to Pasuk Tes. Now what does it say on Pasuk Tes? I'm reading it inside. V'asav ish tohor, eis efer apara, v'yiniach mechutz lamachne b'makim tohor. So v'asav ish tohor, eis efer apara v'yiniach. Now the word ish is extra. Atkan, bein larav, bein l'shmuel, all the steps until now, the latter steps. Not all of them. The first one, that's a machlekes Rav and Shmuel, whether shchit is ksheira bezor. But the latter steps can be done by a kohen hedyet. So ish is telling you that the gathering of the ashes can be done even by a non-kohen. The word tahor, self-understood that it has to be a person who's tahor. That's to include that a woman is qualified to gather the ashes. V'hiniach, mi sheyesh b'das la'aniach. You have to have a certain amount of mindfulness because you have to place it in a place that's pure. So a minor who doesn't understand the dinim of Tum and Tara, he doesn't have that level of kavana, and that will be anyone under bar mitzvah, yatsu, chedesh, or and the shoita, or a katan, since she'ein behem das la'aniach, they are not qualified to gather the ashes. Nekuda. Says the Gemara Tanan Hassan. We're quoting now a pasuk, a Mishnah from Paraduma. From Mishnah Yispara, the Mishnah, we're going to follow on the same concept that sometimes you're going to have mashma moitzi miyad mashma. It's amazing. So as the steps go on, sometimes the rules change, and sometimes you're going to have that the rules are going to stand, and the Mishnah is going to focus on pasuk Yud Zayin. So let's go weiter. In the Chumash, steht in the pasuk that v'lokchu latomei May afar sreifas achatos. We already learned right now who is the one that can take the ashes. So we learned to Braisa that it can be a zor, it could be an isha, it cannot be a cotton, and the lakhu, and they place it on the living waters. Okay, so now we're speaking about mixing the ashes into the waters. The problem, the challenge that the Mishnah has with this pasuk is that before we were speaking about the pasuk that we just quoted is all in the singular. Everything was in the singular, right? V'asav ishtohar, v'chibes, etc. And all of a sudden we go to a lashon rabim, v'lakhu, they take. So says the Mishnah, Tanan Hasam, hakoil kisherim lakadosh. Right? Obviously you have to be tar, but any tar person is qualified to mix the ashes in the water. Which means that Chachamim will hold, the Tanakama holds, the step before is gathering the ashes. So it's good that we're going from Pasuk 9 and we're jumping straight away into Pasuk Yud Zayin because it's really one step after the other. Gewaldik. So it's the same thing. Everyone is qualified. Anyone would mean a zar. Anyone would mean a woman. And not a chedesh sheit v'katan. However, Rabbi Yehuda Punkt Fakert, he holds that a minor is qualified to mix the ashes in the water, upoisel, with a woman, and therefore, with this androgynous, which has some woman aspect in him or her, also invalidated. Says the Gemara, my time this is all following this system of sometimes mashma moitza, sometimes mashma miyad, because since it says v'log chula tame, this is pasuk Yud Zayin, ma'afar serevas achatos, says the Tanakama, hanich the pasuk basifa tzahemshach v'log. Whoever was invalidated, disqualified for the gathering, and what did we learn above? Who's disqualified? The katan pasilach b'kiddush. V'hanach the achshirulach basifa. as we learned before. Who is that? From the ish and from the tar, we are marbe, both a zar and a isha. They are qualified together. So ach shalach bekiddush v'lakchu hemshech. However, Rabbi Yehuda says, if the Torah indeed means to give the rule should continue, it should be mashma memela. So leima krav v'lakach, continue with the singular v'asaf pasuk tes v'asaf pasuk yud zayin should have been v'lakach. My v'lakchu, they is including. So I agree with you when it comes to the gathering of the ashes that a cotton she'ein boidas lahaniach, because v'hiniach is disqualified. Fine, he was out. Now they is to include. Mashma moitzi miyad mashma v'lakchu dafilu cotton te'pas lechasam hachi kosher. Now, Oibazoi, how do you know that women are disqualified? L'chayra, the plural should add more people. Why are we excluding? Because he says that in Pasuk Yud Zayin, it says v'nasan and v'loi v'nasna. V'nasan is in the masculine. Now there's a very important Tosfos here. Tosfos is 1, 2, 3, the fourth Tosfos in the Amit. Tosfos asks, he doesn't understand. The entire Torah is written in the masculine. And we don't always say, since it's a masculine expression, it's excluding a woman. Let's read it inside. And regarding many halachis, well, you only exclude women if the Torah writes the word ish. So why is it different? So the nakuda is that since the Torah went from the singular to the plural, that's from pasuk tes to pasuk yud zayin, and we began with v'lakchu, and now the Torah should have at least continued in the plural. If the Torah would have said in pasuk yud zayin v'nasnu, even though that's masculine, but we're consistent. We don't say by default masculine and not feminine. But since the Torah went from lashon abam to lashon yachid, and dafka lashon yachid in the masculine, here is where we can say v'nasan and v'loi v'nasna. Back in the Gemara, Ayver Abanan, I kasav rachmana v'lakach v'nasan. Don't learn anything to change the rules of mixing these versus the rules of gathering, because the Torah was unable, so to say, to give a continuity in the singular. It says v'asaf in tes. The Torah here could not have said v'lakach v'nasan. Why? Because havamina ad shakal chad v'yov chad. If the Torah would have continued v'lashon yachid, a person would have said that you would need to have the same person who gathered the ashes would have been the way Rashi teaches. It's not only about 1 versus 2, but it would have to be the same one. The one who gathered the ashes you would have thought needs to be the same one to put the ashes into the vessel, to mix it into the waters. So therefore the Torah writes v'lakchu. Lakchu is lashon abim. Lashon abim is not enough, because lashon abim you still would have erroneously thought you need to have 2 people. That 2 have to gather, and the same 2 have to place. The Torah wants to make it clear that those who gather the ashes and those who put it into the water, b'chlal, don't have to be the same people, or doesn't have to be the same person. How does the Torah do it? By writing v'lakchu, taking in the plural, then writing putting in the singular. Now think about it. Even if the one that's putting is one of the 2 that gathered, but it's not the same, because 2 people gathered, so one that did the v'lakchu did not do the nesina. So once you see that you don't need to have those who gathered, or all those who gathered, to be the ones placing the ashes in the water, it's mistaber that none of them have to be the same. Tafilu shakli trei v'yov echad is good. So this whole shinui haloshen is needed. So therefore, the rules of va'asaf mashma memela. In other words, if you don't have a reason to make it mashma moitzi, it's mashma memela. Now, the Gemara is going to continue with pasuk yud ches. Correct. Vashteit in pasuk yud ches. I'm reading it from the pasuk. V'lakach ezo v'tol v'mayim ishtor. Weiter ishtor. So says the Gemara. V'lakach ezo v'tol v'mayim ishtor. So lir abanan, like the v'tol, guys, is the sprinkling. So exactly, Vehiza, the pasuk Yutches is sprinkling. Who's qualified for sprinkling? It's going to be amazing. We have a machlokes in the prior pasuk between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. each one will reverse their opinion here. L'Rabbanan ish v'lo isha. Because don't forget, L'Rabbanan, up until now, a woman was qualified. This ish is lo haitzias isha. The word tahar is coming to include the minor that was excluded, beginning with the hiniach. So you have the mention of ish and tahar, mashma, moitzi miyad mashma, but it's like, the strand of DNA. Everything is flipping now. Whatever they held before is going to be turned on its head over here. And the same thing was with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda will also understand that the ish and the tahar of pasuk Yud Ches is going to be a mashma, moitzi miyad mashma, but it's going to go in the opposite direction. Ul Rabbi Yehuda fakert ish v'loy katan. According to Rabbi Yehuda, katan was qualified until now. And tahar is coming to include a woman, which according to Rabbi Yehuda was unqualified because of the nasan v'loy v'nosna. Meisvei, this is a kasha from a Mishnah on Rabbi Yehuda. It says in the Mishnah, Hakol ksherim lahazois, chutz mitumtum androgenes ve'isha. They're clear, befedish, against Rabbi Yehuda. A woman is not qualified to sprinkle. And I'll tell you more, a cotton is qualified to sprinkle. And not only is a cotton qualified, but what happens if he's such a minor that he's unable to do it? This is a technical thing. He's 3 years old. So it says the Mishnah that a cotton, sheyesh by das, maybe not 3. He has to have enough mindfulness to know that he's sprinkling. But even if he's not old enough to physically be able to do it, he's 6 years old. So a woman is allowed to assist him because the cotton is the one that's doing it, and the cotton is qualified. This is Mamashitas Chachamim. Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis. Now you can right away say, fine, that Shitas Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda argues the problem is Daf Mem Gimel Amid Beis that the Mishnah in Para doesn't record that Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mamish Pung Fakert. So L'choura, from the fact that the Mishnah doesn't quote Rabbi Yehuda's arguing, so does that not mean that he'll be Moida? So why are you, Ula, this is all Ula, why are you also saying that not only do the Chachamim interpret Pasuk Yutes, Mashma, Moitzi Miyad Mashma, Pasuk Yutes, but Rabbi Yehuda is also applying Mashma, Moitzi Miyad Mashma. So then Rabbi Yehuda should be arguing with the Mishnah and he's not recorded. Amar Abaye, no, Ula is correct. Kivin the Amar Mar, once, as we explained above, we see that throughout the many psukim, mashma, moitzi miyad mashma, and sometimes mashma memela. And in our case, if it would have been mashma memela, so the ish in the Torah and Yud Ches would not have been written. So for sure it's mashma, moitzi miyad mashma. And we already learned before the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. So for sure, Abaye backs up Ulam. Rabbi Yehuda argues. Why didn't the Mishnah mention it? The Mishnah doesn't have to always record that there's another Tana that argues. It's not a stira in the Chachamim. So the Mishnah didn't record Rabbi Yehuda, but it has to be that Ula is correct. And now we're going to go to Pasuk Yutes. Pasuk Yutes reads, V'hiza hatohir alatame, Bayoim hashlishi ubayoim hashvi'i. So says Ula that when it says V'hiza hatohir alatame, and the word tahir again is extra because we had in Pasuk Yud Ches we had ish tahir. So again, leave it the way it is. Why are you emphasizing again that a tahir person has to be the one doing the sprinkling? This is the big statement that the Tzedukim argued with. Mechlal shehu tamei. Fakert, the Torah writes tar, it's like ein miut achar miut, like ein riboy achar riboy. Tar means that he's not fully tar. He's partially tar. What are we talking about? Chavre, this is the rule. When someone becomes tamei, even only on a level of a rishon, and they go to the mikvah, are they fully tahar? So let's go back to the first Mishnah in Shas, the first Mishnah in Brachas. It depends for what. If it's to eating truma, and certainly to eating kachim, you have to wait until it's dark. However, if you're eating chulin, and even we'll see in chagiga, the third Pedic, even if you only want to eat ma'aser sheni, for that you're considered tahar. So there's a status of a person that is semi-tahar. The Torah is adding the word tahar to be moitzi mashma miyad moitzi, Mashma moitzi miyad, that here for this step of sprinkling, and actually, according to the Rishonim, this is megale. This is like we began when we learned the last year, that it's actually retroactively saying that just like the sprinkling could be done by someone who's partially tar, someone who became tamei, who went to the mikvah, but it's not yet night, all of the steps until now can also be done with someone that still is before nightfall. And indeed, they used to be metamei the kohen, and take him to the mikvah and have him do all of the steps in the preparation. That was also, we learned to some psachim, and then to counter, people should not think that we're being lenient, so they made extra chumras to show that we're very careful with tumah. But that's the Torah Shebal Peh. Mechlal shehu tamei and limeid al tful yoim shekasher bepara. Now, to appreciate, this is a huge statement. We're mamash seeing that we're beginning with the premise that sometimes the Torah repeats a word and it's not changing anything. Sometimes the Torah repeats the word, it's just being machadish. Sometimes we're becoming more lenient. Sometimes we're becoming more stringent, and we go back and forth, and there is no consistency. Do you need a coin? Do you not need a coin? Well, it depends for which pasuk. So the Gemara says that Amar Abasi, this parsha, learning this parsha was very difficult, and I want you to know that ki havuba Rabbi Yechanan v'Reish Lakish bepara, when these two great chachamim, brother-in-laws, when they were harving, when they were learning the psukim, and they also concluded that there is no consistency. Yeah, Allah said a coin for the first paraduma, but even for the first paraduma, the next step can be a coin hedyet. Maybe the shechita can be ksheira bezar, and with all of the details, and they thought that they're going to come to new understandings. So in other words, they already knew, either they knew what Ula taught, or they didn't know, but they went through the sugya, and you know what? Which is amazing, that Rabbi Yechanan and Reish Lakish came to exactly the same understanding as Ula did. And maybe they were trying to come to something novel, but loy maske meina, they were unable, to bring up nothing new. Ela kamai de masik tala mebei karava, only what a fox is able to scavenge, to bring up from a plowed field, which is nothing. So you can be the big fox, you can be the wisest, the shrewdest, the cleverest, but if it's a plowed over field, you're not going to find a psanushtikel grain. That's an interesting lashon. They came to the same conclusion. Elo Amri, they concluded that sometimes mashma moitzi miyad mashma, and sometimes umashma memelon. Okay, that concluded the back and forth in the psukim. All of this began, Chevra. Really, it began on Daf Mem Aleph Amid Beis when Rabbi Yitzchak said, "Shtei l'shoinoi shamati." We're learning about Yom Kippur. There are two rules regarding the red wool. One of them has no minimum shiur. One of them has, and then Rabbi Yitzchak said, "Shtei shchitoi shamati." Remember, and Rabbi Yitzchak doesn't know which shchita, whether the paraduma has to be done dafka with the kohen, and the paroi shel Yom Kippur can be done with the zar, or the opposite. And that was the machlekes Rav and Shmuel and many other Amoraim. Now we're going to learn a third opinion. Don't worry, we're not going back into the psukim here. The third opinion argues with Rabbi Yitzchak. There's no shtei shchitais. All of the shchitais, both shchitais have the same rule. Sai the shchita of a paraduma. Sai the shchita of the par of the kohen gadol. It must be done with the kohen. They both have to be done with the kohen. Let's read it inside. The Rabbi Yechanan, Tani Tamak made Rabbi Yechanan, someone who learned Braisas by heart. The memory genius who was in the best Midrash of Rabbi Yechanan, that kept on reviewing and saying Braisas, said that he has a Braisa that Kol HaShchita is Kesheres Bizor. Kol HaShchita is Kesheres Bizor would also mean the part of Yom Kippur. The only one, Chutz Mishal Paro. Right? Rav. So Amalei Rabbi Yechanan, hello, this Braisa is corrupted. Go teach it outdoors. Puk, go out. Tana Lebra, teach it outside. No Tana ever said that. He disagreed with that. Because Rabbi Yechanan, look at his statement. Loi matzino shchita bizar. Psula, I take back. He was very lenient. Rabbi Yechanan says the opposite. That both shchitas are ksheras bizar. Just like any other shchita in the Beis HaMikdash is ksheira bizar, we never find a shchita that's done by an non-kohen that will be invalidated. That means he doesn't agree with Rav, and he doesn't agree with Shmuel, he doesn't agree with Rabbi Yitzchak. Any shchita is good bizarre. The Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan, loy mi boy latana loy tzoyes. Now guys, these people that knew Braisas by heart, they were good. So Rabbi Yechanan not only disagreed with the Tana teacher, he didn't accept it. Now Rabbi Yechanan is an Amoira. He can't argue with the Braisa, but he was so certain that there's no such a thing as a shchita, that if it's done by a non-kohen is invalidated. There's no such a thing. So he didn't accept that. This person forgot. He corrupted his memory. Ella, you should know that we know that the teacher of Rabbi Yechanan didn't hold like this. And for a student to disagree with the teacher is a big chiddush. Ella, afilu l'Rabbi lo tzoyes. To Amar Rabbi Yechanan, in the name of Rab Shimon ben Yehoitzadek, who was his teacher, Shchitas para bizar psula. This is Shitas Rav. And Va'ani Oimer, and Rabbi Yechanan used to quote his teacher, and then say that I Rabbi Yechanan, Ksheira, because Lemetzinu Shchita psula bizar. So in other words, Minigeh para duma, it's Rabbi Yechanan together with Shmuel. But don't think he agrees with Shmuel again, because Shmuel holds that the par of Yom Kippur is psula bizar, and Rabbi Yechanan holds that it's kasher bizar. Now, the Gemara now is referring back to the end of the previous Mishnah, and to say that again, we're going through the 10 steps that we spoke out. So, the vidui rishon on the par. Then he made the goydol on the 2 seirim. Even after the goydol, he went back to the bull. He went back to the paroi. And we learned he said a second vidui. Baloi eitzel parashniyam. And as we read in the Mishnah, the words that he said by the second confession were the same words plus. In other words, the first time he confessed for ani ubesi, for his sins and for the sins of his family. Second time he added for koyanecha, for bnei Aaron am kedushecha. So says the Gemara, Maishna bevidui rishon deloy Omar ubnei Aaron am kedushecha umaishna bevidui shenu, that yes, the Omar ubnei Aaron am kedushecha. Answers the Gemara, Tanach the Rabbi Shmuel, kach hi midas hadin noisenes. It's only logical. You first have to be zakai, to be empowered to cover and to bring atonement to people that are chayiv. If you yourself are chayiv, if you are not atoned for yet, how are you trying to bring atonement for others? Mutav, it's much better that you have a zakai and therefore will succeed via chaper al chayiv. So first he made a vidui for himself. That brought about a kapara. Now he has more koyach to be mechaper on the chayiv, which is on all the other bnei Aharon am kedushecha. Va'al yavoi chayiv via chaper al chayiv. Gevaldik. Chavre, moving on to the next Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Shachatoi. Now we already know, Machlokes Rav and Shmuel, Rabbi Yechanan. Now, Shachatoi means the Kohen Gadol. It doesn't mean that a Zod is invalidated. Right? So you'll have over here, Shita Shmuel will hold that even though the Mishnah says Shachatoi, Shmuel cannot argue with the Mishnah, but if a Zod did it, it's good enough. You know what's amazing over here? We had previously in the Mishnayos, is that when it came to the Talmud Shel Shachar, the Mishnah explicitly wrote that the Kohen Gadol didn't slaughter the entirety of both pipes of the trachea and the esophagus of the Talmud Shel Shachar. The Mishnah wrote that the Kohen Gadol slaughtered the majority of these 2 pipes. Someone else finished the shchita, which allowed the Kohen to hold the basin, the mizrak, the bowl, to receive ideally all of the dam hanefesh. Our Mishnah does not mention that. Our Mishnah says shchatoi. One might understand that in our Mishnah, when it comes to the par, we want for the Kohen Gadol to shecht all of their pipes. Now, the Kohen Gadol for sure has to receive the blood. And listen, if you didn't receive all of the dam hanefesh, you're good. But do we say that when the Mishnah said shchatoi, the Mishnah didn't add that it was only roiv shnayim, umeirek achar domoi, because it's relying on what it wrote before? Or does this Mishnah taka hold that for the par of the Kohen Gadol, he has to shech the entirety? It's a big machlokes rishonim. It's beautiful. Chavre, now we'll appreciate the davening on Musaf, and especially for the Balei Tefilla that are here, and by us, in our machzir. It's Bechlal, all of these stanzas that we go through in the Machzor on Yom Kippur, most of them are al pi aleph beis. The Ruach HaKodesh that they had, they're going through the Seder, and every clause goes through all the letters of the aleph beis. In our Machzor, it says clearly here, Shachat roiv shnayim, umedik achar es domei. In other words, we on Yom Kippur we're following the Rishonim that understand the Mishnah that Rabbeinu HaKadosh was brief here, but he's relying on what he wrote before. The Kohen Gadol did not shech the entire neck. He shechted the minimum needed, which is the majority of both pipes. Someone else took over to allow the Kohen Gadol to receive to the best. We're not angels. To the best of human possible, all of the life blood that is beginning right now to spurt out. And the kibel b'mizrak asdami, the Kohen Gadol has to be the one receiving the blood in the bowl. And as we spoke out already a few times going through the steps, it wasn't like in all the other karbanos that after the shechita, after the kabbalah, hayulacha and zrika. No. After the shechita of the par, right, we learned the next step was the Kohen Gadol bringing in the ketores. And many things did the Kohen Gadol need to do to get the coals, to get the ketores. You can't leave blood standing, it congeals. Actually, we learned in Kachim that all of these bowls that we had in the Beis HaMikdash did not have a flat bottom. None of these bowls, cups, had a flat bottom. Anything that was meant to receive blood had a pointy bottom. You remember those Dixie cups by the water fountains, whatever you call them? So, in other words, it's pointy, so you should be unable to put it down. Now, we're going to learn later that inside the Heichal, where the Kohen Gadol did need to put it down, they built a unique receptacle that would hold these cups. But as of now, it was not used, because here, now that we're still outside the sanctuary, and Kohanim could be outside the sanctuary, outside the Ulam and the Heichal, you can have someone holding it and moving it and steering it to make sure that it doesn't congeal, and that's what happened. And says the Mishnah, the Kohen Gadol gave it to another Kohen who would steer it in order for it not to congeal. And where did he stand? There was a location that Al Roivad Haravi'i Shabahechal. He was on the fourth row, on top of the stones. The literal reading is on the Heichal, which is hugely problematic, as we will see that no Kohen was allowed even to enter the Heichal. Forget about the Kodesh Kachim. You were not allowed to enter the sanctuary. So it's going to have to be that the fourth row was not in the Heichal, but it was away from the Heichal, from west to east. That also will be a little bit problematic, and we have time and we'll speak it out. And why was he holding it and being memares, steering it? Kedei, here we have the fourth row, very good. Kedei shelo yikrosh, for the blood not to congeal. Now there's zero pressure on the Kohen Gadol, because someone is holding the blood. As long as this person is being mamares, he's steering it, he can take his time. And now this is what he did. Now he's going to bring the ketores in the Holy of Holies. But he has to get everything ready. So step number one for the ketores, natal machta. He takes a shovel. And as the Mishnah will point out, this shovel that is used for the ketores, for the Holy of Holies, is not like the shovel that's used every day, including Yom Kippur, for the morning and the afternoon. He took a special shovel, and he went up to the up of the outer altar. Ufina gechalim, and he would move the coals from one of the pyres, elach va'elach, here and there. Why would he move it here and there? Is because when you go into the inner part, you get a picture where you're jumping ahead with the picture, Skevan. We're almost there. When you go to the inner part of the pyre, the coals are hotter, they're redder. The choita, and he would take the shovel, he would fill up the shovel, minha me'ukalois hapnimiyos, from the consumed ones that are in the middle of the pyre. And the yada, then he goes down the ramp of the outer altar. He's not ready to go into the Holy of Holies, because now he has to gather the actual incense. What does he do with this shovel? He doesn't have to give it to another kohen to hold, because it's not going to congeal. He can put it on the ground as he did, and he would put it on the fourth row of stones in the Azara. And here's the big challenge. The big challenge is that, as we mentioned, the Gemara is going to say that the Roivat Horavi Shebehechal cannot be in the Hechal. No kohen can be there. If the Mishnah in the beginning is saying that the kohen that's being memares in the dam is standing on the fourth row away from the Heichal, that would mean that the shovel filled with coals was on the floor on that same row. But why did the Mishnah change its expression? either write in both cases, put it on the fourth and the azara, or put it al reva d'revia shabahechel. And because of that problem, other Rishonim say, this is interesting, that it was not in the same location. They hold that the antechamber did not have the same kedusha of the heichel, and even though no kohen was allowed to be in the heichel, a kohen was allowed to be in the antechamber, in the ulam, and that's why Rebbe Dafka changes his lashon. So the kohen that's being memaris al adam was not allowed to enter the heichel itself, but he stood in the fourth row in the antechamber. And Rebbe is meramis by writing heichel, not heichel proper, but the room before the heichel. And this was dafka outside. This was on dafka outside. And machlekes rishonim. Now the Mishnah is going to tell you like this: every day you have to take coals from the outer altar to bring those coals inside the mizbeach hapnimi, upon which you're going to offer the ketores in the morning and in the afternoon. But the shovel that was used to take the coals off the altar was a silver shovel, and there, after he went down the mizbeach uma'ara, he would pour it inside a second golden shovel. So he didn't run up with the gold, he ran up with a silver shovel, and then he put from the silver into the gold. But today on Yom Kippur, he used the golden shovel, and the same shovel that was used to go on the outer altar to retrieve the coals. Another difference. Every single day, the shovel that removed the coals from the outer altar had the size to hold the volume of 4 kav. Even though the golden shovel, the coals that were actually put on the inner altar only had the amount of 3 kav, it didn't bother us that some of the coals fell on the ground. We wanted to make sure that the golden shovel is heaped with coals. So how do you do it? You begin with a larger shovel, you have a larger amount, and then when you would pour it from the silver into the gold, it will pile on the gold plus spill over, which is fine. So you began with a shovel of 4 kav, uma'ara l'toich shloisha kav. On Yom Kippur, because the Kohen Gadol is fasting, because of the fact that the Kohen Gadol has to do every single step of the avodah, chulsha, the Kohen Gadol, so we minimize these steps that were not that necessary. The golden shovel that he used to take it off the mizbeach already was with the right amount of 3 kav. Rabbi Yossi agrees with Yom Kippur, but he argues with every single day. The silver shovel wasn't 4 kav, it was 6 kav. Which is 6 kav. And then the next step is the same. But Vahayoim, even according to Rabbi Yossi, he agrees with the Tanach. Weiter says the Mishnah, every single day the shovel was thick. It says the walls of the shovel, and therefore it was heavy. Again, we want to minimize the exertion needed by the Kohen Gadol. Kala, it was lighter. Now, lighter doesn't mean smaller. Now, the receptacle part was 3 kav. But look at this detail. The handle of the shovel was short. But on Yom Kippur, even though the sum total weight of this shovel was lighter, but they needed to make the handle longer, like Rashi explains, because since he's going to be taking it off the outer altar, and he's going to be walking into the Holy of Holies, and now he has to pick up soon, he's going to have to get to Ketayra soon, so he's walking in with 2 shovels. When you have a utensil that has a long handle, you can put the handle under your arm, in your armpit, verstehst? So it helps you, it takes some weight off your wrist. And still, they made the whole thing so thin, it was gold, but they made it so thin that, don't worry, the shovel still weighed less than the normal golden shovel that was used every day. Another difference, b'chol yom, every day, the shovel that's used for the ketoides, for the coals of the ketoides, hoisa zahava yaroik, the gold was yellowish, which is what we think about gold, yellow gold. But on Yom Kippur, it was the most expensive gold, and therefore it was reddish, adaim. And who says that? These are the words of Rabbi Menachem. According to most of the Rishonim, no one argues with Rabbi Menachem, but since he was the one that shared that, so his name is always quoted. B'chol yoim, every day, makriv, pras b'shachris, ufras ben arbayim. The amount of ketores, which is the same volume of one money, was divided into two parts. Pras means half, as we say in the ketores every day. Half was word in the morning, half was word in the afternoon. And by the way, Yom Kippur also. On Yom Kippur also you had the daily manna, half in the morning, half in the afternoon. What we're learning now is the unique ketores that's brought into the Holy of Holies. But the one that's brought into the Holy of Holies, there it was Malay Chafnav, the amount that would fit into both handfuls of the Kohen Gadol. Now this is not a uniform amount. This would depend on the hands of the Kohen Gadol. And actually, when he would bring the ketores in there, he would first fill his handfuls with the ketores. So now he has the right amount. It was from his handfuls, cupped hands, that he would put it into the ladle. And then in the Holy of Holies, he would flip it back from the ladle back into his handfuls. But that was the shiur. Every day the ketores was ground. It was very powdery. But the ketores that we're using on Yom Kippur is daka min daka, the finest of the fine, which means, my friends, that the already ground ketores was returned into the mortar, and they ground it again. As a rule, kohanim, when that was the picture Kevin anticipated before, oilan b'mizrachi shel kevesh. There are exceptions to this, but as a rule, the kohen that went up the altar, he went on the eastern side of the ramp, and there's a rhyme and a reason, because as we learned that in the Beis Hamikdash, every turn you do has to be to the right. So as a rule, the kohen who went on top of the altar, he would go to the right, and then he would go around in the counterclockwise movement, as we learned so many times together. The Kohen Gadol, because of the kavod that we have for the Kohen Gadol, he went up and he went down, dafka in the center. And by the way, every day the Kohen Gadol also went down to the west. He went closest to the part of the altar that he's going to be going upon. So, and when they come down, Yordim b'maravi. But v'hayoim, on Yom Kippur, and here you have other Rishonim that have a girsa. It's not only on Yom Kippur, but according to some, whenever the Kohen Gadol went on the Mizbeach, Kohen Gadol be'emtzai went up the middle of the ramp, and he walked down in the middle of the ramp. If you remember, the ramp, right, was 16 amas wide. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, I'm sorry, I take it back what I said. But Machlokes Tanoim, Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo oilam Kohen Gadol oila be'emtzai v'yorod be'emtzai. It's not about Yom Kippur. Every day he walked up in the middle, he went down in the middle. Now, if you remember a while back when we were speaking about the machlokes Rav Meir and the Chachamim held that the Kohen Gadol washes his hands, mekadosh yadayim v'raglayim, always clothed, because he would mikiddush prior to unclothing. The kiddush after the mikvah was after he got dressed. Right? There's no problem for him to do it by the kiyur. Remember, Danny asked, but what about according to Rav Meir, that at least the kiddush that happened before the mikvah was when he was unclothed. What, he went to the kiyur unclothed? I said it must be that they brought the water to him, but it has to be written. It's a Mishnah. This is the Mishnah. B'chol yoim, Kohen Gadol, mikadosh yodav v'raglav min hakiyur. Not like going up to the Mizbeach, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, he was unique. No, you begin your avodah, wash your hands and feet by the kiyur like everyone else. But v'hayoim, and this is even according to the Chachamim that hold that he always did it closed. It doesn't, just to know that the Kohen Gadol did not wash his hands on Yom Kippur from the kiyur. They brought to him a golden flask. Don't think the water needed to come from the kiyur. No, the concept is whenever water goes into a clay sharis, and taka the kiyur was a clay sharis, and taka the mayim would become psul and belina. When water goes into a clay sharis, the waters became sanctified. So they had a clay sharis known as a golden flask, a golden ketain, and they would fill it up with water the same way you fill up the kiyur, and you would bring that water to the Kohen Gadol. So this already circumvents the whole issue. So that even according to the Chachamim, there's no need for him to go anywhere. Wherever the Kohen Gadol was, it was to there that they brought the ketain. Well, I'm just thinking out. But if the Kohen Gadol went to the first mikvah outside Kodesh, which he did, the first mikvah was outside Kodesh, can you bring holy waters outside? I don't know. Again, l'chachamim, it's not a problem because he's clothed. So I'm back to my question. Right? If the first mikvah But maybe but according to Rav Meir, that's not a kasha. No, that is a kasha, because according to Rav Meir, did he have to wash his hands before the first mikvah? And the answer is yes, because according to Rav Meir, he needed to wash his hands twice for the garments that he's going to put on.
So he's going to wash his hands inside, and then he's going to go out to the mikveh, or the opposite.
Okay, but I'm saying, that's going to chap. I'm saying if you can't take out these waters from the kedusha, so azara, then he's still going to have to walk around a little bit, and according to Rav Meir, unclothed. Okay, weiter. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, lo oilam, again, just like Rabbi Yehuda says, he always was unique. He always walked up in the middle. That la'olam kohen gadol mekadosh od v'raglav min hakiton shel zav. Weiter. B'chol yom hoyasham arba marachos. The final machlokes today. Every day, you had 4 pyres on the altar. 4. We only learned about 2. Fine, we'll learn about the other 2. Today there was a 5th. Who holds? So says Rab Meir. Rabbi Yossi Omer, and that's where you see that Rambam brings Rabbi Yossi that b'chol yom shalosh. Even though Abaye have a Mesader, we don't speak about, but there were 3. Today there was a 4th. Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'chol yom shtayim and v'hayoim shalosh. V'hayoim. We have another minute. Let's hop one more line. So frag the Gemara. It says v'chol adam lo yeh ba'oil moyed. So how can the Mishnah write that the kohen that was Memare's boy was standing on the roivid revi on the 4th row of stones in the heichal? You're not allowed to be in the heichal. So Amar Rav Yehuda Tnei, you have to amend shel heichal. We'll stop over. Shel heichal means off the heichal. Either off the Hechel means in the antechamber, or off the Hechel Taka means in the Azara. And Taka, that was on the same road that they put down the golden shovel filled with ashes, which is where we're up to. So we are still up to now that the Kohen Gadol has to go get the Ketaitis, God willing, to be continued.